Great to be with you again at work, community. We might be at home, many of us, but we are still at work here. Pat, good to talk to you again. We've had a chance to touch base a couple times during this crisis period, and I look forward to the conversation today.
Hey, always a pleasure to be with you, John. Thank you.
To everyone who is listening and participating, I'm going to post a comment in chat right now. I'm going to try to keep track of your questions and comments as we're having this conversation, weave them in. We do want to try to make room for questions at the end too, but why not take advantage of one of the benefits of this platform if we can't be physically in the same room and let you chime in as we go. So please do avail yourself of that as well. Pat, to start off, kind of framing what we're going through in the context of the future of work, you've made one of the boldest statements I've heard so far from a CEO about how things are going to change, how VMware is going to change out of this, how the workplace is no longer going to be a hotel of office spaces, and it's going to be more a gathering place where people come together to do stuff that you can only do together. Is that still your thinking? And what are the changes that you're going to have to make internally, allocation of resources, culture, messaging to make that happen?
Yeah, and let's a little bit of context for it, John. Before COVID, we were almost 20% work from home, and now we're 97% work from home and distributed workforce. And everybody is having to address that like we are. And the question then is, what happens on the other side of this? And clearly, what we've seen is we've been pretty productive this way, right? Product deliverables, customer support, all of our metrics in terms of how our customers are using our products. This is pretty good. We still find, in fact, many of our customers, have said every metric of efficiency is equal or better in this period of time. And then you sort of say, well, maybe this is a better way of working. And in many respects, less commuting, less carbon footprint. People have more discretionary time as they're not spending an hour or two on the day. Maybe they live closer to family. We have more access to diverse and distributed workforces, and we don't cluster them around major urban settings. So we're just saying, what does this next view, or work 2.0, as we've termed it internally, look like? As I said, I think on the other side of this, we maybe triple the amount of persistent work from home, people who are spending more than 50% of their time in the distributed workforce on an ongoing basis. We've already started to redesign a couple of our buildings with this in mind. As I said, from office hotels to hubs of collaboration, and what that looks like when the majority of the space in the offices becomes collaborative space. Maybe we don't need some of those small remote offices. We want people to come together in the larger hubs of innovation, but maybe a day a week, maybe a week a month, they're in those locations. So a very big shift. And then making sure we have all the collaboration tools and the things in place that make this as productive. And then we got to learn some of the new norms of this environment as well, some of those tribal aspects of working remotely.
And what do you do about where people live? Because right now, people are already sort of located where they are, their homes are where they are, based on having to be in the office. But I can imagine, 5, 10 years from now, somebody might say, well, I want to live in Albuquerque, or I want to live in Boise. Does that mean that you have to have sort of hotel scenarios where people can come in for that week a month and be closer to a headquarters location? Does that mean you start to index salaries perhaps and benefits based on cost of living in the location where a person is?
Yeah, I believe there's going to be some amount of all of that needs to be worked through as people adjust. But if somebody says, "Boy, I can be closer to family, I can have a better cost of living environment associated with me, and I just need to think about getting to the office a day or a week, a month," well, I think that gives them a lot more flexibility. And we're putting at the high order bit, right, employee choice, where they're going to get to decide. And hey, some people like living in the city and not having a car and, walking to restaurants. Great. We're going to support that. But we're also going to say, if people do want to be able to live more remotely, we're going to enable those kind of environments. because we expect that we're going to be here a while. Vaccines and therapeutics still have a long way to go. So we're going to settle into this new model of working, and we're finding it works pretty good. And with that, instead of viewing it as, oh, we got to get back to what it was, let's embrace this and move faster to the future. We do expect that with that probably comes some adjustments. And well, if you're living in a lower cost of living location, hey, there may be salary adjustments, but there may be other benefits as well. And we're doing per diems for work from home locations, for equipment at the desktops, and offsets for internet access. So all of those put together, it probably doesn't change the cost of labor all of that much. But I think the quality and the reach of the personnel that we can have as part of our team, I think goes up pretty substantially.
You mentioned something that I was hoping we'd get to anyway, and that's the connectivity. Does this change the way VMware values connectivity because it's going to be essential for work? The way you value broadband, the way you value 5G coming up, do you start paying for home connectivity in some cases because you need to be able to guarantee it, not just that people have it, but exactly what level of it that they're going to have because their job is going to require it?
Yeah, and we've already rolled out a program where we'll give people so much per month for their internet access. My connection right now is I have AT&T and Comcast coming to my home, and it sits behind one of our SD-WAN VeloCloud boxes to give me quality of service and security in my home environment. And I think this idea of higher bandwidth, more resilient connectivity. And obviously, this is core to us. It's what I call one of the three big ones for us: end user computing, managed devices, carbon black secure devices, and Velo Cloud. Give them quality of service is sort of the three of a work from home package, as we've called it. And those together, I think everybody needs it in this environment as well. And it's better. Boy, why shouldn't I be resilient at home with higher quality of service? And I also think it does point to the future of 5G, enterprise 5G, where these connectivity services become more important for humanity. I'll tell you, John, I was just stunned. I just couldn't believe this when this crisis hit, schools are closed, and all of a sudden we're having the discussions that I thought we had a decade ago about inner city broadband, where kids couldn't have regular access. They couldn't be participating in schoolwork because of broadband availability. So hopefully we finish some of those tasks that I really thought were sort of done a decade ago, where everybody has broadband access, everybody is on a pathway to 5G. We increasingly have enterprise and private 5G as core enabling technologies. And obviously, we want to have our part in helping to make that come true.
You mentioned that, and Wesley Tilley from our audience is asking, how do we solve the rural issues of lack of usable broadband? There was an urban demographic issue that we were talking about there. There's a rural issue also. And David Michael also is asking, will the idea of having a dedicated company office go away in the future? My sense from talking to you is that you don't think the office itself goes away, but the purpose of the office changes. So kind of two things to address there. One, does kind of urban access to existing broadband and rural availability of broadband become even more of an economic development issue in the scenario that we're heading into? And how much does the office change?
Yeah. So on the first one, I believe, and I've probably spoken to 15 senators, 20 representatives in the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And this idea of 5G, there's obviously huge geopolitical issues with respect to China and Huawei. This is getting increasing bipartisan commitment to drive change in the U.S. There's bills in the House, there's bills in the Senate, right? There's an FCC rural bill that's underway, a rip and replace bill. All of these are gaining momentum, and I believe that as we get to the later phases of some of the CARES Act, that as they look to phase 4, some of these things are going to gain momentum and get across the line to help fund some of these initiatives. We're also seeing increasing efforts on the part of the carriers, the key technology providers like VMware to help get those things in place more rapidly. So I'm very optimistic that over the next 2 years, some of these rural broadband, inner city broadband, 5G driven by software standards and technologies like Open RAN, ORAN are going to make a big difference in the availability of access services, high bandwidth services, also campuses being able to do their own 5G networks, rural cities taking a more active role in building out their environment. So I'm an optimist that now is the time, and we've seen so many things come together in this period of time that I do believe we're going to get them over the line in Congress in the near future, as well as the steps on the part of the industry. With respect to the campus itself, as I've looked at it, and as we've talked about our activities and with other companies, I think small remote campuses probably sort of say, why do I need those? Right? If people in a small location need to get together, go to Starbucks and come together. What I really want them to do is come to my hubs, and my major centers become much more of these collaboration events where teams are planning, they're building their tribal customs, they're participating with each other in social activities, and really having innovation centers where we're doing innovation sprints together. And so I expect the main campuses play an even more important role for us going forward. But I do expect a lot of the remote, smaller ones. I'm not sure we need that kind of setting in the future when work from home has demonstrated such efficacy and efficiency.
Huh. Okay. You mentioned China, and that's a lot of Washington's focus in the conversation about 5G. How much of the sense of kind of global competition around 5G technologies and 5G adoption and security do you think is really important to look at and legitimate? How much of it do you think is going to be handled by software providers like yourself that are going to have technologies layered on top of 5G networks that are trying to provide security regardless of the equipment that it's running on top of?
Well, the broadest sense, and I'm a member of the NSTAC, the National Security Technology Advisory Committee. In fact, we just had a meeting earlier today, John, on this topic. And to me, there's a very simple formula, right? If the technologies of the future emphasize software, silicon, and cloud, the U.S. will be advantaged. If they're built on hardware, proprietary systems, we're not doing very well, particularly as it pertains to the communications and 5G technology. So, we're clearly arguing that all of our policies, all of our investments, all of the defense and intelligence decisions need to emphasize these three: software, silicon, and cloud. That's the route for the U.S. to be restored and for long-term leadership on this topic. With that in mind, we're participating, but many others are, I think, rallying around this simple formula that I think positions the United States well. But it is a critical period of time. I think most estimates would say that China will have 10x the number of 5G radio access points deployed at the end of this year than the US will. 10x. It's a pretty enormous step that they've taken forward, and it feels like their economic, industrial, technology policies are pretty focused on these efforts. So I believe it is a very critical period of time. We're clearly seeing bipartisan support, independent of the elections. I think there's good momentum on this topic, and we're certainly anxious to do our part, not just because of the U.S., because it's the right way for technologies to evolve. And to some degree, I compare it to data centers of RISC and vertical architectures before the x86 standard, John. And when that emerged, then boy, every data center became virtualized and became scalable and more efficient. And that gave the benefits of clouds to emerge. This is doing exactly the same thing for telecommunications and the radio access networks a decade and a half later. It simply is the right side of the technology future. And if you're on the right side of the waves of technology, you do pretty well.
I know we're running close to the end of the time that you said you had available, Pat, I want to be sure to ask this question and then check in with you on that time. When we first met, you and I, you were CTO at Intel. Must have been 15, maybe a little bit more than 15 years ago. And you've been in position where you needed to hire and develop a technical workforce kind of as your direct responsibility. I think right now, with the social protests that are going on in the country, a lot of technology leaders, when they think about the future of work and the future of their workforce, they're going to face pressure to diversify the workforce. They're going to be wondering how they do it. Are there either resources or policies that you found to be more or less effective in doing that? What is VMware doing now as you look at diversifying the technical ranks of your workforce?
Yeah, and I just say these types of topics are, they're so insidious and long term, and my heart goes out to those who've been affected by it, and a variety of comments, John. One is simply we just got to put more focus here. Just very very simple. Right. Since the founding of our nation, since the Civil War, since the civil rights marches, we simply have never addressed this view that every human is of equal and infinite value. And with that, we just got to put more to it. I'm proud of the steps that many CEOs are taking, and I want to be seen as part of that group that are taking them. The technology fields, I'd say it's clearly we have to do steps like we've done in the area of gender issues, where we clearly had major biases toward male from female. And we said, hey, we're going to put a hiring, every hire must have a valid female, right, candidate, right? Not that we picked them, but they must have a valid candidate, and you're not done with the hiring process until you have had one through the interview. Or we're saying we're going to have a female and a Black person in that interview candidate. Every position has to be considered that way. We also see that we have to take steps in universities where, hey, we have to be engaging more research activities, intern programs. And I always just love interns, right? You come in, you work them hard all summer long, and then you hire the good ones. Well, let's just bring in a lot more from the Black and the underrepresented community and make them a much more conscious, focused, and deliberate piece of our intern programs as well. Clearly you have to look at all of the things there where there's micro inequities, as we've talked about, but we've sort of focused those on the gender topics, not as much on the racial topics. And I believe we need to rethink about many of those programs and put emphasis in those areas. And those are just a few examples, John, but I would hope that, and as I ended on all hands for our company last week, my simple phrase would be that their deaths would not be in vain, that we truly could make a step that we would all be proud of looking back a decade from now in this period of time.
All right. Some use of the Rooney Rule there that I think is really interesting and want to follow up on. Let me slip in this last one. It's a question from David Michael, and it goes as follows. With office networks, IT departments had strong control over cybersecurity. Now that everyone's using their home networks and devices, how well are enterprises securing their systems and data?
Yeah, I believe this is a key issue. It's a great question. The fact that to some degree, maybe you went from having, if you're a CISO, maybe you essentially had 100 sites, and all of a sudden you have 10,000 sites as everybody's working from home, right? Because essentially your security perimeter has now become that distributed workforce. And this is an area we've seen a number of attacks. We've seen we just had a report that we partnered with and published just a day or two ago that had, essentially a tripling of attacks that have occurred in this period of time. So I think fundamentally it's a fantastic question. It's one that I think every CISO is going to be aggressively looking at in this period of time. Third, obviously, our carbon black technology is critical, a component of our response to this, as we believe that we have to bring together the client experience and management and security need to become integrated and in hand in how you address that profile. Any device that gets attached to your network has to be managed, has to be secured. Otherwise, it can't be part of your internal network and part of your operations. And clearly, as this work from home settles in to become a more systemic part of how every business operates in the future, I believe that everyone will have to look at that from the lens of, am I enabling my remote workforce to be efficient? Am I enable them to be productive? And am I making them secure? And I believe those lenses need to be put. And for that, you're going to have to say, do they have good, reliable bandwidth? And maybe I need to put a VeloCloud into that solution. Have I given them tools that allow them to be very productive? Maybe there are new collaboration capabilities and new tools that we need to put in place for them. But ultimately, I have to make them secure. And John, I could go. I could have a minute or two if you want to go a little bit longer. I'm still okay if you're good.
Well, great. And I want to mention, I think your answer there, you name-checked VeloCloud and Carbon Black a bit. Henry Ng was asking what other VMware technologies you think will help to generate more profits in the home office. I think you answered that question. I just want to finish with the question on the future of work. Is there a trend or technology, but more so a general trend, that you think is going to have an impact on the future, we'll say 5, but I'm thinking 5+ years out, that's perhaps being under considered? If I were to look back 5 years, I think there are some things that have had a big impact, are having a big impact right now that were perhaps discounted 5 years ago. Are there things right now that we should be thinking more about that are going to have an impact on how we work, but perhaps are not getting the hype?
Yeah, and one of the things that I would just point to is, and I've probably talked to John something in the order of 250 CEOs since this crisis has occurred, and different perspectives from them, what they're doing, how they're addressing the environment. To a person, they've almost said that they've been pleasantly surprised with how efficient they've been able to be. Sort of like, that's pretty interesting. But the other aspect is how quickly the IT systems responded in areas that you wouldn't necessarily say are the high-tech domains of the planet. A technology company being able to work from home, okay, not too surprising. But schools, hospitals, public servants, all of those being able, that's been impressive. Now, I've used this phrase that sometimes it takes a decade to make a week of progress. Other times you make a decade of progress in a week. And I think the systemic changes in different industries are the ones that I'm particularly motivated by. The impacts of brick and mortar education. Wow, I think universities are going to collapse unless they embrace this. And when they embrace this idea of distributed remote learning, every human on the planet has become a potential student of their institution. Embracing it in healthcare. Why haven't we done telemedicine before? It's just a better way to do medicine in many, many aspects. But we have all these barriers and insurance and payments and all this other crap that's prevented us from really moving forward. So to me, it's not so much the technology enabling, but it's what are those dislocative things that now become possible in different industry sectors that truly enable a highly distributed work from home, more diverse environment, lower carbon footprint, and making sure that those things don't roll back as we come to the other side of this crisis, and making sure that we embrace and move those industries forward. That's the areas that I'm excited about. And I hope as the different listeners are on here, they're saying, how can I truly make this a future differentiator for my place of work and the industry that I'm participating in?
Well, we've had lots of great questions and comments that I've tried to weave in while we've been talking, Pat. So I think they definitely are asking those questions and more. So thank you, Pat Gelsinger, VMware CEO, for sharing those thoughts, answering those questions. Thank you to our At Work audience for the high engagement and the great questions.